we're going to record, and we're going to record because several people told me they wanted to attend, but were unable to attend tonight. And we're starting promptly, even if that means that there will be people who are going to be coming in for the next few minutes, because the packet that I put together of text, because I said this is going to be a text-based discussion, is not short. Those of you who have studied with me before know that I always provide far too much material rather than far too little material. And after tonight, we will send out the material to everybody who wants it after we've gone through as much as we can together. So I'm gonna start by saying thank you to everybody for coming and joining the call. This is something that I'm doing because I think that there's a lot of confusion about what Jewish tradition says about abortion, and the confusion leads to anger and frustration. And I am a person who doesn't like anger or frustration. I like being kind of even keeled, and it's easier to remain even keeled if you have all of the information that you need at your fingertips. That's not to say that Jews, I think, have a unique place. Our perspective is a little bit different than some of the other religious groups. And that goes back to texts that are some of our most sacred texts. I will say from the outset that I believe deeply that many of the texts that have been used have been over broadly used, and I would say abused to meet a certain goal that was not the intention of the text. And we're gonna start by just sharing my screen. If you are unable to see, hold on, I thought I had it up here. Okay. The first, don't freak out. The first picture, it looks like a church picture, but it's really, it's a stained glass picture. Okay, so I'm just warning you in advance. Don't have a, don't freak out from the get-go. Oh, okay, so that's a picture of stained glass of the prophet Isaiah, if you look right here, and the prophet Jeremiah. And that I was able to find stained glass of the two of them right next to each other was very nice, because the first two texts that we're going to read are designed to set us up to understand one of the fundamental concepts, and that is that Jewish tradition believes that human life begins in the womb. Human life may not be viable at all points in the womb, but we are human in the womb, and God knows that we are there. And so you see Isaiah 49:1, the Lord appointed me before I was born. He named me while I was in my mother's womb. Okay. Jeremiah 1:5. So this is actually part of Jeremiah's like call. This is God telling Jeremiah, before I created you in the womb, I selected you. Before you were born, I consecrated you. I appointed you a prophet concerning the nations. So these statements can't exist if we believe that that we are literally nothing until the moment we're born. And that may sound obvious, but not all people understand that. I mean, they just don't all understand that. And that has to do with some confusion about some text that we're going to read very soon. I will skip any questions right now. So now we're going to go to the first text that has caused a lot of confusion. And I myself once used this verse to explain the difference between the way Jews and Christians understand abortion. I used it not too many years ago, actually. And then I continued to learn and read more and more texts on this topic for a variety of reasons. And I discovered that, in fact, Jewish tradition had a different interpretation than sometimes people, including myself, thought. So this is the very a verse that says from Genesis chapter 9, whoever sheds human blood, by human hands shall that one's blood be shed, for in the image of God was humankind made. Be fertile then and increase, abound on the earth and increase it. Now, I've got the Hebrew here, not because I think everybody's a Hebrew scholar, but because I think many of you do know some basics of Hebrew. And one of the basics of Hebrew is, if you look right here, it says Shofech Dam Ha'adam Ba Adam. That's the entire key to the text. Ba, if you think back to your religious school days, means in or in the. Okay, so this literal translation, which is not what's written here, it's one who sheds the blood of man in man, his blood will be spilled. Okay, that is the literal translation. What we have here is the more poetic version. Why does that matter? Because in order to understand what's going to come next is it's important to have this literal translation of Ba'adam. Now, before we go on, I have to just pause and make sure that everybody knows that Jewish tradition says that Jews have 613 mitzvot and non-Jews have the 7 Noahide laws, okay? In general, there is a teaching from Jewish law that says we can't ask of non-Jews something that is stricter than that which we would give to Jews. Okay, that their 7 laws can't be more intense in observance and in punishment than what Jews have. That would not make sense. You have to have that in order to come to the second text here. So this is from Sanhedrin, and much of the material tonight is from this website called Sefaria.org. And if you've never read the Talmud on Sefaria, the way that they do it is the stuff that's bold is the direct words of the Talmud. The words that are not in bold are the explanatory notes, so that those of us who are not super Talmudic scholars can understand what is being said. Okay, it's from the Steinsaltz, usually from the Steinsaltz edition, the Koren/Steinsaltz edition of the Talmud put on to the internet. So it says from Sanhedrin 57b, it is stated in that book of Agadot, it's up above in 57b, earlier it was talking about that book, that the sages said in the name of Rabbi Yishmael, a descendant of Noah is executed even for killing fetuses. The Gemara asks, what is the reason for the opinion of Rabbi Yishmael? The Gemara answers, it is derived from that which is written, one who sheds the blood of a person by a person, ba'adam, his blood shall be shed. The word ba'adam literally means in a person and is interpreted homiletically. What is a person that is in a person? You must say, this is a fetus that is in its mother's womb. Accordingly, a descendant of Noah is liable for killing a fetus. So this is in a discussion in the Talmud about how non-Jews are to observe the Noahide laws. So people who say that Jews don't think that killing a fetus is a big deal have never heard of this passage from Sanhedrin. Now, there are other passages that say stuff not quite in as harsh terms. So anybody have a guess? Some of you know me very well by now. Why do you think Rabbi Goldsmith here chose that passage to bring? I'm going to show it to you again. It is stated in that book of Agadot that the sages said in the name of Rabbi Yishmael, even for fetuses, et cetera, et cetera. That's your clue. Why did Rabbi Goldsmith bring it? Because every single day we daven. And on all those mornings, except for Sunday mornings when we read a different passage, every morning we say, Rabbi Yishmael Omer, and we read the 13 rules of homiletical explanation. And so it's the same. I looked it up. I have a book in my office called Who's Who in the Talmud, and it's the same Rabbi Yishmael. And we study his rules of how to read Torah. And this is what he says. Now, you should know that just because he says it doesn't mean that it's the rule, but I think that it's important for us to note. Any questions on that? Because I know I'm going fast because there's so many passages. Okay, no questions. That's fine. Okay, so we're going to go to the next one. So this is from Ecclesiastes. Just as you do not know how the life breath passes the limbs within the womb of the pregnant woman, so you cannot foresee the actions of God who causes all things to happen. And then Psalm 139, it was you who created my conscience. You fashioned me in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am awesomely, wondrously made. Your work is wonderful. I know it very well. My frame was not concealed from you when I was shaped in a hidden place, knit together in the recesses of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed limbs. They were all recorded in your book. In due time, they were formed to the very last one of them. And just because I thought that it went well with the passages here, I put this little picture of a 4D ultrasound that I found online, because it's true that 50 years ago, we didn't know how the life breath passed within the womb of a pregnant woman. We didn't. My mom didn't see me inside her belly. I can guarantee that Gary's mom didn't see him inside his belly, right? You know, these technologies didn't exist, but now they are. And I chose this picture because you could see the baby smiling, and I thought that was cool. And I hope to someday have one of those of my own on my refrigerator. Just saying. Okay.
It's a grandchild.
Yeah.
Grandchild. Yeah. I don't expect a 4D picture of my own, you know. Okay. Oh, got it. Okay. So now, so up till now, we've read kind of like halachic things. Now I'm going to bring something that you've probably actually heard this story before. It's more like agadic material. And I'm bringing it forward because, again, I believe that consistency matters. And if we're going to value a story over here for something it teaches, then we have to respect what it implies on the other hand simultaneously. What do I mean by that? We'll see. So you may have heard this before from the Babylonian Talmud, Mida 30b. A lamp is lit for the unborn child above its head, and with it the child peers. Oh, this is what's happening. I should have specified. This is discussing what happens to the baby, the fetus inside the mother's womb. A lamp is lit for the unborn child above its head, and with it the child peers and sees from one end of the world to the other. There are no days in which a person experiences more bliss than during the days in the mother's womb. While there, the child is taught the entire Torah. But as soon as he, I would add, or she, emerges, an angel strikes him or her on the mouth, causing the child to forget the entire Torah. Okay. How many of you have heard that story before? Okay, so you've heard that story before, at least many of you have heard that story. And you might not think of that as having anything to do with our topic, except that we can't use that story to talk about why we have this little thing on our under our nose, and the belief that, you know, our destinies are laid out before us, and that we pick our parents or whatever, all kinds of things that people believe about what happens before a baby comes into the world, and simultaneously say nothing is happening of importance in the womb, at least from my perspective. If you want to say it, you can, but I think we have to acknowledge that we do have these texts that perhaps incline slightly differently. Okay, if you've never heard that story, it's a really fun one. I really love that story. Okay, now we are going to get to the big text. This next text is the text that every Jewish person who says they're pro-choice uses. Well, I should never say every. Very, very, very high percentage of the people who say that they are pro-choice and Jewish use as the basis for their explanation of why Jews believe that it's okay. So I'm not going to read the whole text in the Hebrew, but I want you to take note of the fact that there are two words that I bolded, okay? And one is v'yatz'u, and the other is ason, and we'll get to those in a second. So when men fight and one of them pushes a pregnant woman and a miscarriage results, but no other damage ensues, the one responsible shall be fined according as the woman's husband may exact from him, the payment to be based on reckoning. But if other damage ensues, the penalty shall be life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, etc. So I don't know if any of you have heard this used as the basis before, but many people say that because it says here that if a woman is pushed and a miscarriage results, that the husband gets a fine from the guy, but if other damage ensues, the penalty is life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. Now, the vast majority of Jews that read this read it radically differently than Christians read it, and read it differently than is easily available. And we read it the way we read it because we've been told to read it this way by other people quite often. So when people read this, they say there is a differentiation between the death of the baby, if the baby dies, and if the woman dies, because it says, but if other damage, so the word here, ason, is translated very simply in Eitz Chaim as other damage. Ason means something much bigger than damage in most instances in Tanakh, but that's how they translate it for some reason here in this particular verse. But I want us to look at this word right here. A woman who, isha hara v'yatz'u yiladeha. Yatz'u, does anybody speak Hebrew? Does anybody know what the word yatsa means?
Go out.
Go out. It means go out. So it does not say if the woman miscarries. It does not say. The word for miscarry is a different word. It's hafala. Hey, pay, lamed, hey. It's the same word for abortion, actually.
But did they word then?
What?
What did they call a miscarriage 5,000 years ago?
I don't think that it was this word. This word is not, it's not that. I had it written down and then I left a bunch of stuff at home, at the office today. I have to go back and look, but it's easily, you could say, this is how Christians, I've heard Christians interpret this, and some rabbis, not many. If when men fight and one of them pushes a pregnant woman and the baby comes out and there is no other damage, the one responsible shall be fined, as the woman's husband may exact from him the payment to be based on reckoning. But if other damage ensues, life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. You could read this as causing a preterm birth. There is nothing that says explicitly that the baby comes out and dies. And if you read it that way, you're asking for the man to pay a fine because he caused a preterm birth, which is not easy. Preterm birth today is hard for babies to survive. Preterm birth back then would have been exceptionally dangerous. So you don't have to buy that interpretation, but there are people who that's how they read it, and they have a reason for it, because the Hebrew does not say explicitly that the baby died. Okay. Now, here's what our Eitz Chaim Chumash says on it, and I want you to note that I put the bold here and the italics here. Those italics and the bold are not in the Chumash, but this is in the way our Chumash is set up. There's the Peshat commentary, the Drash commentary, and then whenever there's a dealing of Jewish law, they separate it off in its own little box, okay? This is what it says on this passage in our Eitz Chaim Chumash that we use at Temple Beth El. Because the Torah demands only a monetary payment for a fetus in contrast to life for the woman. So that means that their understanding is that this is the baby dies, but the woman does not die. The fetus is not considered to be a full-fledged human being, and abortion is not murder. It is, however, an injury to the woman, and as such, abortion is generally prohibited. It is allowed only to save the physical or mental health of the mother. Many authorities, including the CJLS, that is the Committee for Jewish Law
Standards.
and I'm forgetting the S for whatever, permit abortion to prevent maternal anguish over the prospect of giving birth to a child with severe defects. Abortion is not permitted as a retroactive form of birth control. That is in the Chumash that we read every Shabbos and every holiday. And that is not what many Jews believe.
Right.
Somehow there is a disconnect between what is explicit in our Chumash and what Jews in this country have come to believe. And I would say Jews in other countries too, it's not just this country, okay? And let me see if I did the right thing. I did not pull that one up. I was looking at some statistics about Jews and abortion, and I'm going to give you the low number because I can't remember the high number exactly, but a little over 70% of American Jews believe that abortion should be permitted in every instance. That's based on a survey that was taken a couple of years ago. And it's an interesting percentage because that is not what our text that I just read tells us. Our text tells us there are 3 particular instances when it is okay. And that is when the mother's physical or mental health need to be preserved, or if this says permit abortion to prevent maternal anguish over the prospect of giving birth to a child. It's actually not just the maternal anguish, but if one is told with certainty that the child is going to die, right? If you know that your child has Tay-Sachs and is going to die by age 7, or any of the many Jewish genetic diseases that lead to slow and painful deaths for the children, or as I had happened to a congregant of mine in Alabama, if you're informed that the child is anencephalic, it only has a brain stem and not a brain, and can't live outside the mother's womb, then most of most authorities, including the conservative movement and many Orthodox, would allow in that instance as well. But that's very different. That's very different than some of the laws that have been proposed over the last couple of years in various states of the union here, including one that was passed in New York, basically allowing for abortion to be a choice up until the very last second of delivery. And that's not what our text says here. Okay, so we're going to now go to a couple of more modern texts that are not from our Chumash. This is the Mishneh Torah as quoted. So it's Fred Rosner's translation of the Mishneh Torah in this book called Medicine in the Mishneh Torah. Okay, it's a pretty straightforward title. And this goes back to, why is there a typo there? Okay, goes back to what I said before. A Noahide who kills a person, even in the fetus in its mother's womb, is put to death. Therefore, so this is like it's a cutoff from a continuing conversation. So too, if he kills one suffering from a fatal disease, or ties a man with a rope and places him before a lion, or leaves him to starve to death, he's executed, because in each case he caused the death of the victim. Okay, so again, this is in the Mishneh Torah saying that a non-Jew can't conduct an abortion. Okay. Now, this text is somebody's, this Rabbi Shlomo Nachman. I looked him up. I found this quote when I was preparing, and I looked this guy up. He's some weird kind of, he's got his own website. He's got a weird background. But what he wrote was interesting, and it went well with what I'd seen from somebody else, but I couldn't remember the name of the other person that I'd seen it from. And so I just put him down because I looked up so many things. I couldn't find everything when I was finally ready to put it all together. So this says it's not a license to abort an unborn child. Rather, the text we read up above was a reference to involuntary manslaughter. Many translations read, and a miscarriage occurs, rather than as a premature birth results. The passage, in my opinion, is to a premature birth when the context is considered. The text says that if the child departs the womb and no other damage ensues. And that's kind of what we talked about before. Now, okay, so now you've heard what the Mishneh Torah says about somebody who causes a miscarriage or conducts an abortion. And we've read some stuff from the Talmud that makes it seem as though, oh, all this Talmud stuff makes a lot of sense, right? And you're like just trucking along. Okay, great, fantastic, wonderful. But I want us to recognize that the materials that we are dealing with are very old materials, and they did not have 4D ultrasound technology like you and I have, and their knowledge base was a little wonky. Okay, and so I brought you just one example of something from Maimonides, because we all love and respect Maimonides and think he's awesome, but he didn't know everything. It's just very simple. He just didn't know everything. So this is from a collection called The Medical Aphorisms of Moses. That would be Moses Maimonides, as quoted in the same book, Medicine in the Mishneh Torah by Fred Rosner. So it says here, if a woman is pregnant and aborts or miscarries after 2 months or 3 or 4, then one knows that the cause of this is the white liquids which accumulated in the openings of the arteries that are in the uterus. Depending upon these liquids, the connection between the pulsating vessels or non-pulsating vessels on the uterus and placenta becomes weaker because the womb is unable to tolerate the additional weight of the fetus. Rather, the woman will abort or miscarry it and easily expel it from herself. So, why is that there? It's not because he's correct. Medically, he's not correct. And that's why it's there. It's to remind us that when we are relying on Talmudic teachings from a long time ago and physicians from the Middle Ages, it is true that ethically, the ethics of the thing has not changed. But you cannot base your scientific knowledge on them because they simply didn't know. They just didn't know. It doesn't mean that they were bad or anything like that. It's just, you can't, I mean, I could use all kinds of examples, but we don't, this isn't the book that the doctors are using in the hospitals today. That's all. It's just not, okay? I saw 2 hands. Shavy, was your hand up?
No.
Paulette, was your hand up?
No.
I could have sworn those hands were up. Okay, we are going to go back to the texts then. Okay. So this next text is basically going to say what I just said. This is from a rabbi named David Novak, and I did here. Let me see. Let me get my notes on him. David Novak was born August 19th, 1941, and is a Jewish theologian, ethicist, and scholar of Jewish philosophy and law. He is a conservative rabbi and holds the J. Richard and Dorothy Schiff Chair of Jewish Studies as professor of the study of religion and professor of philosophy at the University of Toronto since 1997. His areas of interest are Jewish theology, ethics, and biomedical ethics, political theory, and Jewish-Christian relations. Okay, and this is what he says. The discovery of DNA and when it first emerges in a human being should change our thinking about the beginning of human life in the same way that the discovery that babies born in the 8th month of pregnancy are viable changed our thinking about early infant life, even though in the days of the Talmud, people believed that they were not viable. Jews are bound by halachic norms. With regards to questions of human life and death, however, they are not bound to some of their applications that are based on what we now know to have been inaccurate, outdated science. The science of the Talmud has been superseded by more current science, which itself might be superseded in the future. So it's just a more beautiful version of what I was trying to say about Maimonides right here. That when we learn new things, we have to take those into account, which is why when I said at the very beginning that I myself have done a lot of studying on this subject, it's because everybody views their world and their life through their own personal experience. And I began to look at all these things differently when I had my children and when all of my children were fertility babies. And when in the baby book, right, the baby book that we have, the very first picture of my daughters is of 3 groups of 5 cells. Those were the embryos in the dish before they put them in. I can't tell you which one is Avi and which one is Rafi and which one didn't make it. But I know that 2 of them are my daughters, right? And so once I had that picture, they literally handed it to me the day of the procedure. I just began to think, I better learn some stuff because I never would have imagined myself as having that as a picture in a baby book, right? And so I've just continued to study for all of the past 25 years, and my ideas have changed. My ideas, some of them have not changed too radically, but some of them really have changed. Okay. So now this is also one of the more famous passages. It is from Mishnah Ohalot, and it is somewhat gruesome. And it, again, it's based on the fact that their medical experience and technology was not what we have today. And it says, if the life of a woman giving birth is endangered by the unborn fetus, the fetus must be cut up in her womb and removed, for her life takes precedence over its life. Oh, sorry, that's a typo here. If its greater part, that is the head or the body, has already come forth, it must not be touched, for the claim of one life is not greater than that of another life. So I want us to take very careful note of the fact that it's saying, if the woman is giving birth and her life is endangered by the fetus, that's when you dismember it in order to save her life. That is, it's not just because she changed her mind in the 8th month. It's if she's giving birth and it's going to kill her, you save her. Now, the question is, it says here, the claim of one life is not greater than that of another life. And that's a beautiful ethical teaching. But the truth of the matter is that there is a reason why the rabbis wanted to justify saving her. They wanted to justify saving her because she has a greater chance of leading, she's already alive, she's already self-proficient, she can have another baby.
Mhm.
A baby back then that had no mommy to feed it
Mhm.
had a harder shot of getting to its 2nd or 3rd birthday unless they somehow were able to find a wet nurse for it. Okay, they didn't have baby formula. We don't have as much baby formula as we need right now in this country, but we have some. They had none. Okay, and so there was a reason that her life had to take precedence. Even today, I think most people would say, between a baby who has no power over itself or a woman,
Mhm.
most people would say that the woman should be the one who is saved, unless you watch any one of those medical shows, and then the woman half the time says, no, I'll die so my baby can live, and all of that. But that's her choice at that point. It's not a Jewish law situation. Okay. Yes, Sandy. You're muted.
When Jordana, our eldest, was pregnant with Rory, who's now 5, when she was trying to give birth, she had had a C-section before. When she was trying to give birth, nothing was moving, nothing was happening. And as it turned out, they did a C-section and found that the uterus had ruptured and Rory was just laying inside her. And if they hadn't done the C-section, they both would have died.
Right. So that's why we are very lucky today. If a woman's in distress and she's in, at least if she's in a medical setting, a proper medical setting, they can almost always do a C-section and hopefully save both of them. And if not, then at least one of them, right? And unfortunately, childbirth is always dangerous. It's always been dangerous. It will continue to be dangerous as long as another living human comes out of another living human, right? I mean, it's our bodies. Human babies have big heads, and it's hard on human women, much harder than some of the other mammals on planet Earth. The Bible tries to give us an explanation of why it's that way, but it just is hard. And so we are very lucky to live when we do. This rule about cutting up the baby was, it was pre-C-section time. And this was their method of saving the baby, not the baby, saving the woman. They needed to save somebody, and they chose the woman. But if the baby is mostly out, okay, you cannot touch it. I want to emphasize this because there are two different explanations of something called partial birth abortion. And one of them says that the baby is killed while its head is still inside. And the other version is that's not the case. And if the baby's head has already come out, then it's murder from the perspective of Jewish tradition. Okay, Sanhedrin. So now the question is going to be, ironically, okay, if you're allowed to kill the baby, if the woman is in distress, why aren't we even more lenient? Okay, and so this is going to explain why. Rav Chisda raised an objection to Rav Huna from a Braita. So a Braita, in case you don't know it, is something that's like a Mishnah, but was not included in the collection that we call Mishnah. If a woman was giving birth and her life was being endangered by the fetus, the life of the fetus may be sacrificed in order to save the mother. But once his head has emerged during the birthing process, he may not be harmed in order to save the mother, because one life may not be pushed aside to save another life. Here's the key part of this. If one is permitted to save the pursued party by killing the minor who is pursuing him, this is in a different situation. If you are being chased, if you're an adult and you're being chased by a minor with a knife who is going to stab you to death, and the Talmud makes it clear that you can kill that minor if you're an adult, why then would we not be allowed even more so to, kill the baby? Because it says the fetus is a pursuer who is endangering his mother's life. The Gemara answers, this is not difficult, as it is different there with regard to the woman giving birth, since she is being pursued by heaven. That is, since the fetus is not acting of his or her own volition and endangering the mother of their own will, their life may not be taken in order to save the mother. Okay, so I think that this is an important passage, because this concept that she's being pursued by heaven is, we don't like to talk about it, but this is the kind of concept that they have in many Christian settings. So one of my sisters-in-law gave birth to her two sons in a Catholic hospital. And she was warned both times that if she was in distress during labor, they couldn't guarantee which one they would save if they had to make a choice. And I remember her being very upset about it and thinking, that's just crazy. But this text from the Talmud makes it understandable a little bit, right? That it's out of our control to a certain extent, and that's how the Catholic hospitals at that time, that was a long time ago, that's already almost 3 years ago that happened. but that's how they felt, and this could fit in with that. Any questions or comments before?
I
we-
have to tell you that that is really distressful to me, distressing. Because I don't see, I can't grab the idea of heaven in the act of birth. It's like, pardon the expression, I'm gonna use the word witchcraft. Because that's just what it brings to my head. And I know, like you said earlier, 5,000 years ago, medical science was somewhere in the very, very dark ages. Very, very. And we're a whole lot further along. Probably not as long as we'll be in another 100 years, when I won't be here, maybe. But
Never know. No, just kidding.
correct. No, I agree. I agree. I'm breaking those rules. But I find that use of the word as if it's a,
Act.
something coming down from above, almost like thunder, coming from heaven. It just is, to me, a little over the edge,
Right.
or maybe a lot over the edge.
I think, I mean, I hear you and I agree. I think that when I read it, I try not to take it too literally. I basically understand it to mean that it's out of the child's hands, and it's to a certain extent out of anybody's hands. And we are gonna try and do the best we can.
Right.
And that's, do I believe that text is meant to be interpreted to mean that God's personal own self is pursuing this woman and seeing, am I gonna let her live? Am I gonna let her die when she's in the middle of childbirth? I personally do not read it that way, but I can see how it could make you very uncomfortable, for sure.
Especially since I take things, Ken will be the first to tell anybody, I take things very literally.
Yeah,
So it's
so try on that one to just
be
not.
vague.
Yeah. Sapir.
Yeah, I mean, this whole conversation is making me, angry, because I cannot argue about the tradition and the halacha. It is what it is. I understand that what you're presenting is text-based. I don't necessarily agree with every interpretation of every source you've quoted. It's, to me, sometimes they take things literally when it suits them, or they take things very broadly when it doesn't suit them. I agree totally with Paulette. It makes, it's just witchcraft. And, so I'm trying very hard to kind of restrain myself and accept this discussion for what it's worth, which is a text-based discussion of the Jewish view of abortion. And I'm trying not to impose my own personal opinions, but it's very hard, because I just, don't believe any of this stuff. I cannot accept what they said 500 or 1,000 or 5,000 years ago. I cannot accept it. And I'm very hard to just kind of learn from this and not, trying not to get upset, but I am.
Right. So I'm going to tell you about getting upset when you read something. Okay. When you hear something that upsets you, it means one of two things. It means it's really challenging your beliefs, or it is hitting something very personal, right? And there could be other explanations, but I think it's okay. What I'm saying is okay to feel upset. Allow yourself to sit in the upset and allow yourself to say, that's not how I would interpret that text, but I can perhaps see how somebody else would. That's why I'm trying to bring, right? I brought two different versions of the same of the same passage, right? Two interpretations of Exodus, because different people view it differently. I'm not going to tell you which one you have to believe, but you have to, my goal here is to allow us to open our minds to the possibility that we may have been led down what I call, that expression, the primrose path, and been slightly misled about what our tradition actually does say about it. And that would have been done for a variety of reasons, which are not necessarily religious in nature. And if we have time, I'm going as fast as I can through the text. Maybe we'll be able to actually talk about some of those other reasons, but we'll see. Okay. Blah, blah, blah. So now we're back to the Mishneh Torah. We already kind of covered this, but I just want to read this one section. The sages ruled that in the case of a pregnant woman in dangerous labor, it is permissible to dismember the fetus in her womb, whether with a drug or by hand, because it's like a rodef pursuing her to kill her. However, once the head is emerged, one may not touch them, because then they're basically born, and you can't, if you kill something that's born, then that's called, infanticide, which is explicitly prohibited in the Torah. Okay, so now it was not until I was preparing for this presentation that I had ever heard this text used by anybody as any kind of justification for saying that babies are not human until a certain point in time. And it says, count the children of Levi according to their father's house, according to their families, count all males from the age of 1 month and upward. And so I read some people think that means that Jewish babies are not considered babies or humans until they're 1 month. And they used as explanation for that the fact that prior to a month, a baby that is smaller than that you don't even have to go through the same grieving rituals and the same mourning rituals. And I will tell you, that is not because they did not think the baby was human. It is not that at all. And if anybody ever tells you that, they're flat out lying to you. It is because I just got done saying their medical science was not good.
Oh.
Labor was hard. Babies died all the time. And so they made it so that if a baby died in the first month, which could easily happen, the family didn't have to sit Shiva forever, right? It's about not making people be constantly, sitting Shiva. And that's what it's about, because it's not easy to constantly be in mourning, because you and I, when we lose somebody that we love, we may follow as many rules as we can, but I can guarantee you that we're not following it as strictly as many of those people did back then. I mean, I know people, right? I mean, even when a parent dies, a lot of people don't follow many of the rules, let alone a stillborn baby or a 1-day-old baby. It's just, people just are not going to do that. And so that's what that's about. It does not mean that our tradition ever thought they were less human. It's just, it's about the living people, not the dead one. Okay. So because of that, I brought a couple of pictures of, in case anybody thinks that our tradition says that babies, aren't babies if they're too early. This is a picture from 2016 of the youngest preemie ever to survive in Israel, 22 weeks. She was really little, and look how cute she is. She was born and weighed 607, oh, not she. Oh, I'm such a sexist. Looked like a girl to me. Baby boy, 670 grams. I have no idea what that equals because I don't speak grams, but I think it's little. Okay. Anybody know how many grams, how much
think-
that is?
30 grams is an ounce, I think.
About 450 grams to a pound, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay, so a little more than a pound. Okay,
Yeah,
so he had only a 20% chance of survival, but he survived and he's actually, he's okay. This was from 2016 in Israel, 22 weeks. And the youngest surviving preemie in the world was born at 21 weeks in June of 2020. And he went home, and you could see he went home without even any oxygen or anything. Okay, so that's that. Okay. Now we're going to get to some of the harder. Sapir already thinks that it's hard, right? So, but now we're going to get to even the harder stuff. Okay. So one of the reasons that I brought this forward is because of the forthcoming decision on Roe versus Wade. And all of the stuff that surrounded the signing of new legislation in the state of Florida, since most of us are in Florida. I know some of us are not in Florida, but most of us are in Florida right now. And I wanted to make sure that we acknowledge that people say that there have to be exceptions for, in general, what are the reasons people say there have to be exceptions to strict rules about abortion? For what instances? We already covered a couple of them. Go ahead, Sandy.
Rape, incest, and if the mother's life is in danger.
Okay, so rape, incest, if the mother's life is in danger, I'm gonna say, because Jewishly we say physically or mentally, and if the baby we know is gonna die anyway. Okay, Sandy, is your hand up? No, okay, okay. Then, can you, oh, I'm lowering your hand. Okay, there we go. So that being the case, I struggle myself with bringing this text forth, but believe it or not, there is a group called Jewish Pro-Life something something. And when I looked up what they said in comparison to what, you know, I already knew from my the Rabbinical Assembly's website and all of that, they had this text: fathers shall not be put to death because of sons, nor shall sons be put to death because of fathers. Each man shall be put to death for his own transgression. And they had that there as an argument against automatically assuming that a baby who was born from rape would be aborted or incest. I will just say, my guess is that 95% of incest is also rape, right? Like, I mean, it's that we distinguish between the two doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but that's neither here nor there. There are people who are alive today. They are the products of rape. We know that rape is a major form of warfare in certain parts of the world. And there are lots of babies, for instance, in the Congo who were born as a result of rape. We also know that in Jewish history, during the pogroms, there were a lot of women who were raped and a lot of babies that came from that. And in both these situations, I don't think that abortion access really existed or exists. And I would never feel personally, this is as much politics as you're going to get from me probably tonight. I personally would not ever feel comfortable telling a person who was raped that they had to carry the child. But Jewish law says two opposite things: that are you really going to punish the child because of who its father was, versus the mother's mental anguish. And every minute that she's pregnant, knowing she's got, she's carrying a child that she didn't want, that was from an act of violence, and all of that stuff, right? And
Well, I think it's also the act of the reminder every day, as much as that child would be loved,
Mhm.
because once the baby is born, we instinctively
No.
love the child.
That's
But
not-
every day-
sometimes it's most times, but sometimes not. And
Well,
and-
my next statement was going to be, but it's also a daily moment to moment reminder of the assault that took place on her body.
right,
She
right,
can't like separate the two.
right. So I would say that if Jewish law would say, if the woman's mental anguish is
Mhm.
such that she's able to get through the pregnancy, she should deliver the baby and give it up for adoption if it's going to cause her too much mental anguish. It's not an automatic, it should not be an automatic assumption that they're going to abort. Now, let me take a step back. That's if she didn't know she was pregnant, right? If she didn't know she was pregnant and then she finds out she's pregnant. Generally speaking, in an absolutely non-ideal situation, right, in which a woman is assaulted, then the best case scenario would be that immediately after that happened, she would be able to go and get the Plan B pill, and then it's a non-issue, right? It's a non-issue. So it's only if there's a rape and then for some reason they're not able to get the Plan B pill, and. So but Jewish law would say that because of mental anguish, there would clearly be permission. I think most rabbis would say, despite the use of this Deuteronomy in certain situations, I think that most rabbis would give a complete heter. So this is from 1971, the year after I was born. Rabbi Schneerson said he expressed his unhappiness with the act of abortion. And so that's pre-Roe versus Wade, okay? The next one is Rabbi David Bleich. I have a 2-volume collection of his material in my office if you want to look at any of it. He said, a Jew is governed by such reverence for life that he trembles lest he tamper unmindfully with the greatest of all divine gifts, the bestowal or withholding of which is the prerogative of God alone. Although he be master over all within the world, there remain areas where man must fear to tread, acknowledging the limits of his sovereignty and the limitations of his understanding. In the unborn child lies the mystery and enigma of existence. Confronted by the miracle of life itself, man can only draw back in silence before the wonder of the Lord. Okay, I don't know what I should have put, what year he wrote that, but I didn't look it up. This was two different quotes from Rabbi Norman Lamb. I'm going to just let you guys read them yourselves. They basically say the same stuff. One is, why do I have two quotes from Rabbi Lamb? Because one is pre-Roe versus Wade and one is post-Roe versus Wade. And I thought we should have both. Oh, look at that. I have two different size fonts. I hate it when that happens. Sorry about that. Okay. Did everybody read those two quotes from Rabbi Lamb?
Yep.
In case you don't know who Rabbi Lamb was, Rabbi Lamb died two years ago on my husband Jeff's 55th birthday. And he was quite well famous modern Orthodox rabbi, scholar, academic administrator, author, and Jewish community leader. He was the chancellor of Yeshiva University until he retired in 2013. He was also the president of Yeshiva University, the first one of the presidents of Yeshiva University to be born in the US. He was a disciple of Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik, and he was ordained at Yeshiva University himself in 1951. And he is my son-in-law's uncle. So, that's how come I remember when he died, because we got a call. So anyway. Oh, wrong one. That's not the one I wanted to do. Hold on. Back to the text. Any questions before we go to the next text?
I don't have a question. I kind of want to relate like Sapir. I struggle with the issue that if things come out in a certain way and then states decide just, either to go to one extreme or another, it takes from us the right to wrestle with this and try to figure out how the halakha applies in certain situations. It basically dictates to us what the choice will be. And I have a problem with that, because I don't need to go into what my personal beliefs are. I'm probably middle of the road, because but I resent that right would be taken from people to wrestle with it, to decide, to use the halakha to make the decision.
I hear you, and so I'm going to deviate from the order of what I was going to do, because I'm looking at the time, and so I'm going to deviate from what I was going to do. Let me see it where I put this one thing. Okay, it is here. Okay, so I'm gonna share this next set, this screen here. I apologize that it's a little bit blurry,
No,
but
no,
I
it's okay.
copied and snipped and blah, blah, whatever. So this is a chart giving some statistics. So before, I'm going to unshare for a second. So we live in Florida, and in Florida, we just passed the legislature just passed and was signed a law banning most abortions after 15 weeks. The only exceptions that are allowed in Florida are for the mother's physical endangerment, as well as mental endangerment, if it's to the point that it will cause her physical harm. And if the baby is definitively defective. Apparently, I'm not 100% sure if there's any rape exception, because I looked it up, and one thing I read said there was, and another thing I read said there was not. So I'm just going to say, if there's not, the only exceptions are for the mother's physical and mental health, and the child being completely physically
Mhm.
deficient after 15 weeks. 15 weeks is into the second trimester, and all body parts have been, just so you should know, all body parts are there at that point, right? Every body part is there. There isn't, all the toes are there, all the fingers are there, the nose is there, the ear, everything is there. It's just very teeny tiny, right? And the baby is not viable at 15 weeks. The smallest baby we said was a 21 weeker, and that's it, right? A 21 weeker, 21 weeks and 5 days or something like that is like the smallest, earliest. Now that by itself is miraculous when you think about it. I mean, that there are babies that are living that are that early, it's mind-boggling, because a pregnancy is 40 weeks. So it's just barely halfway through, and we can, you know, somehow we can get the baby to do half of the pregnancy out, you know, half of its development outside of the mother's body, which is unbelievable. We don't know where we'll be in another 30 or 40 years. But when my daughters were born 9 weeks early, they gave us the statistics, and it wasn't super awesome. So that in 25 years, they've come so far, it's kind of unbelievable. Now, all that being said, now I can show you the statistics here. Okay, abortions by age of the mother, according to the CDC in 2019. Under 15.2%, 15 to 19 years old, 8.5%, 20 to 24 years old, 27.7%, 25 to 29, 29%, 30 to 34, 19.6%, 35 to 39, 11%, and more than 40 years old, 3.7%. So that's the breakdown of the ages of the mother. In 2019, unmarried women accounted for 86% of all abortions in the United States. And I'm not gonna discuss that. I'm just telling you it. Women living with a partner to whom they are not married account for 25% of abortion, even though they only represent 10% of women in the population. Okay, now, the state of Florida records a reason for every single abortion that takes place in the state. I didn't know that until I began preparing for this.
Oh.
In 2020, which is the last set of details that they have complete, there were 74,868 abortions in Florida. And this table lists the reason. 0.1%. No, that's not 1/10. That's 1/100th of a
1/100th.
percent. Sorry,
Right.
I'm not a mathematician. 1/100th of a percent, the pregnancy resulted from an incestuous relationship. By the way, that means 1 in a 1,000. Is that correct? Is my math correct? Is that 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 10,000? Who's the mathematician? It's whatever it is, it's too many. I have to say I was surprised it was even that much, but okay. The woman was raped 15%, 0.15% of them. So that's not, significantly less than 1%. The woman's life was endangered by the pregnancy, 0.2%. There was a serious fetal abnormality, almost 1%. I'm just going to say almost 1%. The woman's physical health was threatened by the pregnancy, which is a little bit different than threatened is not as serious as endangered, 1.48%. The psychological health was threatened, just about 2%. Social or economic reasons, 20.5%, and no reason at all, meaning they just are using it. They're just aborting, 74.9%. Sandy, yeah,
Right, no reason could mean no reason was given. That
Right.
does not mean that they just wanted, I'm going out screwing and I'll just abort. It could mean that they were abused, that they were forced, that they were raped, they just didn't admit it.
it's okay. I can accept that. The next one is, when in a pregnancy do most abortions occur? And this is what's particularly relevant for us in Florida, where it's going to be not okay after 15 weeks. Okay. And I was kind of flabbergasted. I thought it was a little different than this. In 2019, 79% of all US abortions occurred prior to the 10th week of gestation. 93% occurred prior to 14 weeks gestation. I had no idea that it was that high.
That's
We
good.
spend a lot of time talking about late term abortion. It's a very minuscule number of abortions. So you can see by weeks when it is. So this would be, for us, 43 plus 36 is 70.
8,
Yeah.
79.
Plus
Well, they did the
13
arithmetic.
plus 13 is 92, plus another 3 is 95. So it's actually a little more than 95. It's less than 5% in of
Late
the
semester.
abortions that we're talking about. Now, that may seem little, but what did I say? There were 74,868 abortions in Florida. So 10% is 7,486, and 5% would be 748. So we're talking about 748 abortions in the state of Florida that would be prohibited based on this new law. Gary, are you saying something? You have to unmute, Gary.
Your math is wrong.
Okay.
78,000, 10% is 7,800, 1% is 780.
Oh, okay.
5%
So
is
five, so
10%.
5 times 780 is what?
3,500.
4,000.
3,500.
Up to
3,500.
Okay, that
3,500.
makes a lot more sense. I was thinking that was far too little. So
Yeah.
4,000, which on the one hand is a small number. On the other hand is a huge number of women. 4,000 is a lot of people that are going to have to deal with this law. So I don't know if any of those numbers were surprising to you. I personally was surprised by some of the numbers. I really thought that we talk so much about late term abortion. I didn't realize that 95% basically are prior to 15 weeks. Now, one of the problems that we have is that, what did I say? Jewish law allows abortion for the mental health of the mother, the physical health of the mother, or if a baby is given to have extreme physical deformity. Many women don't have those ultrasounds where they discover that until 18 or 19 weeks, which is past the time when you would be allowed to do it in the state of Florida. But as I read, in the state of Florida, if you have you would have to have 2 doctors verify that the child is not, has a severe deformity, and then you can still gain permission. Now this is, yes.
I'm always reminded of the conversation that Pete Buttigieg had when he was berated about late-term abortions. And he said, a woman that makes a decision for a late-term abortion has already planned for that baby, maybe designed the nursery, and some bad news, very, very bad news came her way to push her into that discussion of the need for a late-term abortion. And that's why I struggle with, we need to be allowed to be flexible and live within our own capability to make our own decision, which is why, you know, I hate what's happening in this state and in the states that are gonna have, you know, 10-week abortion laws. And, you know, some women don't even know they're pregnant until they're 2 months, 2.5 months in.
Listen, I gotta tell you something.
Literally.
I worked in an emergency room and we regularly had women who came in labor and did not know they were pregnant.
Right.
They were very heavy. They missed a couple of periods. They didn't really think much of it. They had some stomach aches. I swear to God, I worked ER and people came in not knowing they were pregnant. So if they had known they were pregnant, or if they found out even at 8 months that they were pregnant, maybe they didn't want it then.
Right. So I've heard stories like that. I've watched some of those strange stories from the ER thing and go, wow, I certainly knew when I was pregnant, but that's because all my children were fertility babies. So there you go. You pretty much know. But it's a very, very difficult decision. So Mark just said adoption is a better option. And I would say Jewish law would, I found this quote and then I lost it. It was about like the cutoff age is like 7 months pregnancy. Like if a baby is viable, I'm gonna be very generous. I'm gonna say 25 weeks. If we are busy saving babies over here at 21, 22 weeks, and at 25, 26, 27, 28 weeks, a baby can easily survive.
Mhm.
At that point in time, I would recommend the woman, even if she says, induce me now, I don't want this baby, fine, induce her and give the baby up for adoption.
But
It's,
is that, and I'm gonna be very straight and direct. But is that, and Gary's shaking his head because he knows me well enough over 18 years. Don't laugh. But is that conservative Judaism's point of view?
that
I
is,
agree with you personally.
I would say that is what some of the conservative rabbis would say. There are some conservative rabbis who were up in New York clapping for them when they said that women could abort until the very last day in the middle of labor. I personally don't, I try not to say my personal
No, it's
perspective
okay.
100%, but I can tell you, I don't agree with that. In case you couldn't tell, that's not my perspective, okay? I think that at that point in time, the child should be given away for adoption, you know? But here's
But
the
it
kicker.
went dead.
Here's the kicker.
Had to,
Childbirth, what did I say earlier? Childbirth is
He
always
tried.
dangerous. It's
put it
always
in, so I can't see it. So I finally got it in, and then it had to
Did you want to say
So I-
something, Ann? I mean, Judy,
no. It's Judy, you got me right.
I got you right, Judy.
Okay.
You didn't want to say something?
No, I was just talking to Steve.
Oh, okay. Okay. Gary, was your hand up? Oh, okay. So it's a very difficult thing. I think that I used to tell my confirmation students that Jewish tradition and Bill Clinton aligned on one subject, and it was abortion, that it should be safe, legal, and rare. Right? We aligned perfectly.
Well,
Me and
the
Bill,
rare word is fine, right?
what?
The
And,
rare word is perfectly fine.
And so the problem is that because we are worried about the exceptions, right? We want to make space for those exceptions. And we get mixed up and think that even in those exceptional circumstances, it's not supposed to be a big, like, it's not supposed to be a big deal. So I listened to the discussion from the American Jewish University that they had on abortion a couple of weeks ago. And the young woman, probably my age, she looked younger than me, whatever. The woman who was the speaker is a head of one of the Jewish women's organizations. And she said that she didn't want us to say pro-choice, that she believes as Jews, we need to embrace that Judaism is a pro-abortion religion. And I got extremely distraught, probably more distraught than Sapir is right now. Because there is,
How about that?
what?
I don't know about that.
Because Jewish tradition has never said that
Mhm.
we are pro-abortion. There's a difference between giving permission, right?
Mhm.
Permission, and if you need to do it because of these circumstances, is not the same as let's throw a party when so-and-so has an abortion. It's just not, it's not the same.
Mhm.
I think, and I don't want us to confuse the two. I would never shame anybody who wanted to have an
Mhm.
abortion for one of the reasons that we've listed, or for a reason that isn't listed, but that is causing them deep distress. And I've shared with you at a sermon already a number of months ago, a couple of real life situations I had in my rabbinate, right? I already said, I had a young woman, she
Mhm.
was young, a young woman whose baby was determined to be anencephaly, with no brain. And I was living in Alabama at the time, and she had to drive from Alabama to Atlanta, because at that time, Atlanta had looser rules, and she had to have the abortion there and then come back. It was horrible. It was a horrible experience for her. The only consolation that I had was that when I left, she was pregnant again, and Baruch Hashem, it was a healthy pregnancy with a healthy baby. But that was a horrible experience to have to support my congregant as she had to drive to another state to have an abortion for a baby that was never going to live more than a couple of hours outside the womb. Simultaneously, I had another situation where a congregant and I happened to be pregnant at the exact same time. We were like practically due on the same day. And she was told that her baby, I always forget what it's called. Most of its major organs were on the wrong side. It was on the outside instead of the inside. And we were going to the same high-risk doctor who was a member of the congregation. And she told her in no uncertain terms that she should most definitely abort the baby. That if she didn't abort the baby, she was condemning the baby to a life of misery and surgery, and it was going to die anyway, and she should abort the baby. She had married a man who was a convert from Christianity to Judaism and who believed deep down in his soul that all abortions are murder. And she they decided to carry the baby to term. Long story short, the baby is now 19 years old. He's not a baby. He's 100% healthy. He required 3 surgeries before he was 1. Nobody could touch him without sanitizing their hands for the entire first year of his life. But he was one of those rare miracles.
Mhm.
That's the problem, right? You never know. Are you going to get the miracle or are you not going to get the miracle? And who's going
No.
to tell somebody that they have to take a leap of faith that they're going to get the miracle? I mean, like, it's a very hard, nobody would have said boo if she had chosen to abort, right? But
Mhm.
Nobody should ever say boo.
You and I think most of us would say that. And, you know, overturning, my only political statement about this is going to be overturning Roe v. Wade isn't going to stop abortions. It's only going to stop safe ones. I'm old enough to know the phrase backstreet abortion,
Hangers.
hangers and all the rest of it. So that's why it's important to have wide-ranging abilities versus narrow.
I hear you. I will say that what will end up happening is it goes back to the states, and then everybody's going to have to duke it out in the states. And eventually what may happen is what perhaps should have happened a long time ago. And that is that Congress actually passes laws on it. You know, all of this is because,
I don't know.
okay, Mark said the Constitution is not a place to enshrine abortion. It's going to go back to the states. It may go eventually to the full Congress, but in states like Florida, it will be restricted a certain amount. In every state's going to be different. That's the way it was prior to Roe v. Wade. That's the way it will be after. And I don't have the answer. I know that I am equally, I personally would be more uncomfortable living in New York with its law than I am in this state, although I wish it would have been 20 weeks instead of 15 weeks. But I would be very uncomfortable living somewhere in which people clapped. I mean, I watched it, in which they clapped when they voted to say that abortion could happen in the middle of labor. And that's just me.
That's over the edge.
I don't represent all conservative rabbis on that. I can guarantee it. Paul, and then Sapir.
My whole problem with this entire thing, this entire question is, since time immemorial, it's been a bunch of men telling women
Yes.
how to take care of their bodies. And I disagree with Mas. It is not enshrining it in the Constitution if Congress passes a law. Congressional action is not an amendment to the Constitution. The states, 2/3 of the states have to approve a constitutional amendment, which has to be passed in 2 separate sessions of Congress. So it's not enshrining anything. It's passing a law, just like they passed, they passed laws, well, they used to pass laws all the time. Very few laws get passed right now, but it's not enshrinement.
Right. Okay, so it was a judicial fiat, not a law. Sorry. Okay. Who had their hand up? Was it Sapir? Go ahead, Sapir.
And again, I understand that this is a discussion about text-based Judaism. Okay, this is not a political discussion. This is not, I understand that. But again, just the way I don't want any Christians shoving their religion down my throat and telling me what they believe and how their God would be upset if we did this or that. I don't want Judaism shoving anything down my throat. And while I am, I have a personal belief about having an abortion at the last second when you're in labor. I mean, sounds a little crazy to me, but basically I would say everybody should be able to make their own choice. If we have constitutional things saying we have the right to bear arms, so we have the right to bear children, or we have the right not to bear children. And I think each person, that's why I'm saying, again, I understand this is a text-based discussion, and my personal opinion has nothing really to do with it, so I'm just going to shut up now.
Okay, so I don't want you to think, first of all, your Jewish learning should inform your political perspective, right? I don't need to tell you what to think on it, because you'll take this for what it is, and you'll take the parts that mean something to you, and you'll weave it into your personal way of functioning in the world. And so I don't need to pound politics. Do you know, that's how come I don't ever think I need to pound politics. You have the brains, each and every one of you, to make your own choices, period. I did, however, want to make us realize that the United States is really very odd man out on planet Earth. Israel and the United States are two of the most permissive places on planet Earth for abortion. And I'm just going to read you
More.
I'm going to read you the rules from a few other places. In France, it's legal on demand up to 14 weeks. At later stages, 2 doctors have to certify that it's done to prevent grave physical injury or mental health danger, or that the child suffers from an incurable illness, basically like Florida, except that's the whole country of France. And it's the same in England, Scotland, and Wales, except that it goes up to 24 weeks. Northern Ireland only for 12 weeks. Spain, exactly the same as France. Italy, of course, that's a very Catholic country.
So it's Spain.
First 90 days, then upon request for health, economic, or social reasons. Portugal on demand for the first 10 weeks. And there's a 3-day waiting period. And then the restrictions increase exponentially at 12, 16, and 24 weeks. Norway till 12 weeks, by application to 18 weeks, and only until a viability of 21 weeks and 6 days. And after that, no exceptions, period. Sweden up to 18 weeks. After that, permission up till 22 weeks. Poland has, by the way, the most restrictive. It's legal only when the pregnancy is a result of a criminal act or when the woman's life or health is at risk, period. I didn't know that Poland was so restrictive. Germany, it's completely forbidden, but you will not be punished if you're caught doing it in the first trimester. Israel is by approval of a termination committee. In Israel, 99% of requests to the termination committee are given a yes, and 74% of all abortions in Israel are done by the 9th week. And so while this is, that's all, I just did Europe, okay, parts of Europe. So while this is not a political discussion, I did want us to think about the fact that It's not the same everywhere on planet Earth. It's not the same everywhere in this country, even right now, even with Roe v. Wade on the books.
Amazing. You really
and
did a
so
good
it's
job.
Very interesting. Judy, did you want to say something?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I think I'm on mute.
Okay. Did somebody, I could have sworn I saw a hand up. I keep seeing these phantom hands. Okay. Okay. I am trying to decide if I'm going to read something or not.
I would
gonna
just read it.
Okay, I'm going to read it. Okay. So, a few things that somebody said, if anybody believes that it's the woman's right to choose because the baby is a part of her, okay? So I just am gonna say that changing this, I read this and it struck me. Changing the meaning of words doesn't change reality. All we can ask are, is it a human? Did it come from a human being? Is it a genetically unique individual? Is it alive? And the answer to all of those are yes. A child in its mother's womb is human. It is alive. It has its own genetic markings, and it is growing. Until it's born, we don't know if it's viable. Even frankly, a full-term baby, not all of them are viable, right? It could be born and have something wrong with it that you didn't know about, and it could not be viable. But it's very tricky to make these determinations. As a rabbi, I've had to counsel people in awful situations, and in the end, all I can do is hold their hand while they're making their choices. I feel grateful that in most instances, it's turned out all right. Either the bad situation wasn't as bad as they expected, or they were able to have another baby shortly after they had to terminate a previous pregnancy. But there are a lot of Jewish genetic diseases people forget to get tested for, and they can lead to bad outcomes. And we have to remember that. There are people, like Sapir said, that don't know if they're pregnant. If they have polycystic ovaries and they don't have regular periods, they might not realize there are all kinds of crazy things that can happen. But I don't want anybody to ever think that Jewish tradition just gives what's called a heter. There isn't a general blanket permission. There is no such thing as abortion on demand in Jewish law. There just is not. There is abortion when it is needed for specific circumstances that are the purview of the woman and her doctor to determine. And we could go on for longer and talk about the fact that while abortions help, many people believe that having an abortion is the right choice for women quite often because it will help them financially or they're emotionally or whatever. There is an entire conversation you can have about women who have abortions who it's not always peaches and cream, right? And there were just in the last month a clinic here in this state was shut down because it had 2 incidents in a too short of amount of time, and they had to go in and fix things there. It's not always peaches and cream. I have a family member who marks every year the day that she had an abortion for a baby she didn't feel she could keep. And that's hard, right? That's hard. And I don't want to say, because Judaism says, oh, abortion, you can have an abortion if you need one, that doesn't mean that it is not hard. Like nothing's easy. None of it's easy. The truth of the matter, none of it's easy. And it can't be because it involves at least two human lives, the life of the woman and the life of the unborn child. And perhaps three lives, right? The husband, right? Gary, is your hand up?
Baby daddy.
The baby daddy. Yeah.
I was saying hello to somebody who just walked in the house.
Oh, somebody's, oh, I thought you had
Sorry.
something to add. Okay.
Sorry.
So, I mean, it involves people. And it's not an easy thing when you're talking about people's actual existence. And so I know I didn't solve anybody's problem. Oh, Sapir.
Well, the one thing that I'm going to go just question, because a minute ago you said that Judaism is putting it in the hands of the woman and her doctor. And that to me is how it should be. In other words, religion should not specifically enter the conversation unless the woman is very religious and has to consult her rabbi, blah, blah, blah. But if you're going to say that it should be between the woman and her doctor, to me, that says it all.
Well, that's what it is, because the Jewish tradition gives permission if it's endangering the woman's life or if the baby is defective. Who can determine that other than the woman and the doctor? Right? Right? I mean, nobody else can determine that.
Hopefully.
And so that's the only path we have. So we are past our time. I appreciate every one of you for sticking with it. It's a hard topic. I don't know what's going to happen after they put out their decision, but at least you have at least some texts and some ways of looking at things the way you may have always looked at it, and maybe some new ways how other people look at it. And you can keep it or discard it, but at least your mind will have been stretched, pushed for a few minutes tonight. And all I'll say is everybody should be full of love and kindness. And thank you for learning with me. I'm gonna stop the recording, and I'm gonna make sure that the texts are available for anybody who wants a copy of the texts.